What's up, y'all? Alvin here. And that's right, I said it. Bass is the best fish to catch on a fly rod.
I tell the good jokes.
Okay, so this may be a controversial statement, but I think it's true. And let me tell you why. So the bass, largemouth and smallmouth bass are the number one game fish in North America. Like every year, something like 50 million people fish for black bass, largemouth and smallmouth bass in North America alone. So there's got to be something to that, right? It's kind of like pop music. I may not be a huge pop music fan, but everybody else loves it. So there's got to be something to it, right? One thing is there's bass everywhere. So bass, you just have a lot more access to bass. And so just being able to fish is always going to be better than not being able to fish. And being able to fish, with a fly rod is always better than not fishing. So if you can fish fish for bass with the fly rod, you are going to get to fish a lot more. So what's the deal? Why is bass fishing so great? Why are bass such a great fish to catch on a fly rod? Okay, so number one is, just they're everywhere, man. I mean, there's bass in lakes, there's bass in rivers, there's bass in ponds. Like I said in a video years ago, if in Texas, we always say, if there's a body of water that doesn't dry up during the summer, it's probably got bass in it. So just pure access. Maybe you don't have time or money to take some exotic trip. If you're not living in trout country, you don't have money or time to take some exotic trip, but there's probably some bass, at least a short drive from where you live. I mean, I'm fortunate enough, there's a tiny little pond that I can walk to and catch bass in it. I made a video about it years ago. It was pretty cool. I didn't know there were any fish in there, and I went there and I actually caught fish. So that is proof. There's bass everywhere. Now, the other thing is there's not just one bass. I mean, it's like fishing for trout. There's brown trout, there's rainbow trout, there's brook trout. Well, there's largemouth bass, there's smallmouth bass, there's spotted bass, there's Guadalupe bass, there's Kentucky bass. And that's kind of become a thing now to like travel around and catch all the different bass species. And what you will find out is not only are there different fish, but different tactics, different types of water. We can fish in the Colorado River where we will catch largemouth bass and Guadalupe bass, and they behave really differently. We find them in different parts of the river. The Guadalupe bass are typically going to be in the moving water. The largemouth bass will typically be in the slower water, depending on time of year. Maybe one fish is more active when the water's warmer. This guy's more active when the water's cooler, so there's a lot of variety. So it's not just one thing, it's not just going after largemouth bass, you're not just always throwing poppers, or you're not always throwing streamers. It's just such a variety, just in bass fishing. It is almost like going fishing for cutthroat. So our native fish, the Guadalupe bass, is only found in Central Texas. So, compared to that, to some cutthroat trout that is only found in one particular western state. The other thing is our Guadalupe bass, like if you catch one in the Colorado River, it's actually genetically different from the ones that you would catch out in, say, the Llano River or the Guadalupe River. So we've got a bunch of different strains of Guadalupe bass, which are only found in Central Texas. And we've got a bunch of different strains in the different rivers in Central Texas. So there's quite a variety to go along with the abundance of bass, so they're everywhere. There's all different kinds. They have all different types of behavior. There's all different ways to catch them. So perfect for fly fishing, right? Okay, so one of the big things for me is the topwater action. Bass are known for eating frogs and and bugs and stuff on the surface. And there's really nothing cooler than seeing a bass blow up on a topwater. You know, everybody loves to catch trout on dry flies and trout on hoppers. And occasionally you will have, maybe when you're fishing with big hoppers, you'll have a big brown trout come up and really smash a hopper. But typically a trout strike on a dry fly is pretty mild-mannered, you know, pretty mellow. They just come up, they sip it, and they go back down. Once you set the hook, they go berserk. But bass, since they're predators, I mean, they're killers. So they've got to chase that fly down and just smash it and kill it, make sure it doesn't get away, and then they immediately go back to their hiding spot. So that is one of the most exciting things you can do with a fly rod. And flies are one of the best ways to throw topwaters, you know. So they're typically going to be a lot lighter. You know, it's much easier to throw a weightless fly than it is to try to throw some type of topwater. It's going to make a much nicer presentation. So yeah, I mean, bass are awesome. If you like dry fly fishing, it's hard to beat a bass. Now, here's another thing about bass that, like, you know, some people say, you know, they're not that great because they're not like long, hard fighters. I mean, you know, you will get a bass, especially bass in moving water, Guadalupe bass or a large smallmouth bass will put up a really long fight comparable to a trout, especially, you know, cold water bass, smallmouth bass in particular. But typically you get a pretty aggressive strike, maybe a couple of pretty good jumps, and then, you know, they tend to come in fairly easy as long as you don't have a too light of tackle. So, but that's cool because, you know, I've gone out with young folks, kids, and they've been lucky enough to have a giant bass blow up on their popper, and, you know, they get a couple of jumps out of it. Everybody's freaking out, and, you know, then, you know, the bass gives up. We got him in the net, and that's just really awesome because it's not maybe as hard to catch a trophy bass once you hook it. It may be hard to hook it, may require a lot of skill, some luck, but typically if you've got the right tackle, you hook a nice bass, the chances of catching them are pretty good. Now, a lot of times trout fishing, you may have to use some really light tippet, really small flies. You know, you may have to go to some extreme measures to fool a really big trout. And then once you hook them, your chances of landing them are much less than landing a nice bass on a big popper with a big hook and some heavy tippet and a stiff rod. So once again, the bass wins out. See where I'm going with this? Okay, so a couple more things, reasons why bass are the best fish to catch on a fly rod. You know, one is, you know, the flies now, I think, are sometimes, not even sometimes, a lot of times more realistic than an artificial lure. Just the way they move through the water, the fact that they, you know, probably don't have the same type of weight to them. They, you know, neutral buoyance, they swim a little bit more realistic. And a lot of times, even if you're fishing somewhere that has quite a bit of fishing pressure, they probably haven't seen a ton of flies, unlike trout on a very pressured trout stream, which a lot of our western trout streams do get a lot of fishing pressure, and the trout can get really picky. You can go somewhere that has a lot of fishing pressure from conventional tackle anglers and throw flies that the bass have never seen before. And bass do remember. They have a much longer memory than a trout does. So they will turn off on a particular lure if they've been caught on it or they've seen it too many times. But they ain't never seen a game changer. And maybe they did see a game changer, but they didn't see the one you tied last night, you know. So once again, that is another reason why I think the bass is a better game fish for fly anglers. Okay, so final reason why, and this may surprise some of you, but the old guys that we all watched when we were kids on TV were catching all these bass and they were throwing them back. We're like, what? You know, that's crazy. They threw those fish back. But that got widely adopted because of those guys. So, you know, the bass tournaments, they're all catch and release. They're really bass fishing has really done a lot for catch and release fishing. You can argue the merits of catch and release fishing, but if you're into catch and release fishing, you really have to thank the bass anglers for kind of making that a thing. And if you're into catch and release fishing, it's probably going to be a lot easier to practice catch and release fishing with a single hook fly. So treble hooks, multiple barbed hooks are going to be much more damage. They're going to cause much more damage to the fish than a single hook fly. The other thing is, even with a single hook like a worm, a lot of times the baits will have scents to them. They will, the bass will want to grab a hold of a scented worm and much more likely to swallow it deeply. Whereas flies, they tend to spit those out pretty quickly. Now, you can hook a bass really deep, like if they just really inhale a big frog or a big popper or something like that, you can hook them deep. But once again, you've only got one hook most of the time, and most of the time we're fishing barbless. So once again, I think that fly fishing for bass, bass are one of the best fish to catch on a fly, and one of the best ways to catch bass is on a fly. All right, so now if you're a trout guy and you're curious about this bass fishing, I've got an awesome video for you right there. Check that out. I've got a whole course on fly fishing for bass. I'll throw that in the description. Thanks for watching the video. Give it a thumbs up if you like it. If you're not subscribed, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.